Hey, Big Wheelers here. So today we are working on a 95 BMW 740 IL. This car is here because it has the very common kind of dreaded oil light issue. The car, when it's at an idle, the oil light is flickering off and on, and if it comes up to a hard stop or something, the oil light will come on. And so yeah, we're going to address that today. I personally couldn't find anything on the web as far as videos or pictures go about correcting this issue. Well, I've actually dealt with it a few times, so I figured I would just make a video and share the information. There's one of three possibilities that can cause this issue on these cars, or one of three more common possibilities anyways. And the first being here to the right of the engine bay, if you're looking at the front of the car, you've got your oil canister here. And I found a bunch of people, asking, well, where's the oil pressure sending unit? I can't find it. It's really easy to find on the oil filter canister here. It's just there on the corner, down in the bottom corner there. It's just a 2-wire sending unit. Sometimes that could be your issue right there. It's just the sending unit is faulty. We know for a fact on this car that is not the problem, because when it's idling and that oil light's flickering, the engine is really noisy. You can hear the top end clicking real bad. So it's obviously starving for oil pressure. If you hit the gas a little bit, bring the R's up, the click goes away because it's building pressure. So that tells me right there that it's something else. It's more than likely going to be a sludge problem in the front of the engine. Or I'm sorry, in the front half of the oil pan. This car actually has 2 oil pans, which I know sounds crazy, but it's got one that runs the length of the motor. It's up higher that you can't actually get off unless you remove the engine. And then it's got a front one that's actually very easy to get off. And fortunately, that's where the sump, the pickup tube is at. So that being the second possibility, that the sump is just potentially plugged up, or it's obstructed. Now, I did notice when I was underneath this car, there's a big dent in the oil pan, like somebody might have hit something at one point. That could be the problem, but I highly doubt it because the dent doesn't look significant enough. The third thing is these cars, especially the 95 with the V8. Well, I guess the V8 was the only engine offered in the E38 this year, but the oil pump bolts, the bolts that retain the pump to the block, actually back out, and they cause the pump to kind of walk off. So that right there will give you a very big problem, and you don't want to drive it around like that for any length of time, because you got no real oil pressure. So you could potentially do significant damage to your engine. So it's going to be one of those things. I'm almost certain of it. So I haven't actually taken anything apart yet. I've just got it up on jack stands and basically got a light under there. So I'm going to kind of walk through the video with this and show you how I do this. So if you're having the same issue, you can address it yourself. It's not something that needs to be taken to a dealer or a mechanic unless you absolutely do not know what a hand tool is or how to turn a wrench. This is actually pretty straightforward, and I know a dealer would probably charge you upwards of $1,000 to do something like this. So it can be done in your garage in a day, half a day even. But I'm going to go ahead and walk you through it. So I'll stop blabbing here. The first thing I did, because I think it is probably a sludge issue, even if it's not, this doesn't hurt, is I went down and I just got a bottle of this stuff. It's made by Gunk. It's just a motor flush. And I actually use this quite often on higher mileage cars. If there's any sludge or anything in the engine, it'll actually help break it down. What you do is you pour this into your motor when it's cold, into the oil, and run the engine for 5 minutes, and then you drain your oil and you put new oil in. You obviously want to change your oil filter too, but I figured since I'm going to take the pan off anyway, it couldn't hurt to run that through, and if there was a sludge issue, maybe that would help break it down, so it'd be easier for me to clean up. So I ran that through, and that's kind of to the point where I am now. So I'll crawl under here with the camera and I'll just kind of show you what I'm talking about here. Car's pretty dirty underneath, but alright, so this is the front half of the oil pan here that I was talking about. You can see your drain plug there. There's just a bunch of 10mm bolts that go all the way around the base of this pan. there's nothing else obstructing it from coming off, so it's real easy to get out of there. You got a couple little brackets here for this. Looks like actually I don't know what it is. It's a dead end right here, but anyways, yeah, just these two bolts here retain it. You'll be able to just probably pull those off and just kind of set that out of the way. But yeah, and then you have your oil level sending unit is right here, so you'll have to deal with that too. You don't actually have to take it out, but if you look, I think it's right, yeah, right there. It just unplugs, so just unplug it and just leave it on the pan. At least that's what I'm gonna do. So first thing you want to do, obviously, is drain your oil. So I know that this car holds roughly 8 quarts. I think it's like 7.8 or something. So my stupid little drain pan here only holds 7, so I've got 2 of them. I'll have to catch half and half or something. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. It's pretty much impossible for me to hold this camera and do all this at the same time, so I'll just kind of do it and then I'll come back to it after I get each step done. So I'm gonna drain the oil out right now, and then I'll be back. Alright, so I've got the oil draining. In fact, most of it's draining here. I'm still just letting it drip, but I wanted to point something out, and this is to kind of show you how good the motor flush works. We changed the oil in this car 2 days ago, literally 2 days ago, and he's only put maybe 40 miles on the car. So essentially the oil that came out should still be nice and clean. And if you look, I mean, look how black that is. It's disgusting. So that right there tells you that the motor flush did something. It scrubbed something in there, because it knocked all that nasty out of there when I drained the oil. I mean, that oil's jet black, and I'm not kidding. I personally put it in 2 days ago. So yeah, it's working. The motor flush is doing something, so that's a good thing. Anyways, I'm just gonna finish letting this oil drain, and then I'm gonna start unbolting this oil pan. One more thing I wanted to point out. I don't know if you can see it, but you see that big nasty crease in the oil pan right there? That's that big dent I was talking about, and it's pushed up pretty good. So when I actually get the pan off, I'm going to go ahead and try and straighten that out a little bit, just to make sure that's not an issue. But I do think the sump, I'm pretty sure the sump is in the back half back there, so I don't think that would really be affecting it. But we're going to fix it anyway, just to be safe. So alright, so I went ahead and I unbolted the oil pan, and I dropped it down. Relatively straightforward, came right off there. In fact, I just went ahead and I took all the bolts out, except for just one in the back there, and it was kind of just stuck up there. Mind you, it was empty, so it wasn't heavy, but I went ahead and just on that last one, I put my hand up, took that last bolt out, and I just let go, and the pan kind of stayed, so I just lightly got underneath it, just pulled down just a little bit, and it just popped right off, and it came straight down. So perfect. You don't have to fight it off. What I found, I actually confirmed what I thought I might find. I haven't touched anything, and look at that. Or if my camera will focus. Come on. Maybe it's not going to focus. Anyways, you can clearly see there is a pile of bolts laying in the oil pan. There we go. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. I'm a little worried as to why there's 5, because as far as I know, there's only 3 that hold the pump on. So it's kind of scary. But anyways, I'm certain that's what's going on with the oil pressure issue. I'm going to guess maybe the pump came unbolted or something. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take, you can see that plastic cover there. It's held on by 3 10mm nuts. And we're going to pop those off, and we're going to take a look and see what's going on in there. And we'll come right back. Alright, so I just want to kind of get underneath here. Now, I showed you the pile of bolts in the pan there. I figured out where that big one went. I couldn't find where them 4 smaller ones went, and then it dawned on me the pump bolt's on the back. So I took a peek up in here, and look at that. Those top 2 bolts have walked out completely to the point where they're touching up against that aluminum plate there. And then you can see these other bolts are all backing out too. That one up in there, it doesn't look like it's came out, but regardless, all these are coming out, getting cleaned up, and I'm going to put a little red Loctite on all of them. You can't really see behind the pickup tube there, but that's where 3 of those 4 bolts laying in the pan came out back there. So at least I can account for every hole that there's a bolt laying in the pan, so I know where they all go. I don't think he'll be able to see. Maybe. Let's see here. If I grab a hold of the pickup. Ah, come on. My light's not cooperating. I'm about to give up on it. Anyways, if I grab a hold of the pickup tube here and I push, I don't think you can see it in the video. I can't hold the camera still. But if you see the 2 halves of the oil pump are separating. I mean, completely coming apart. I could stick a sheet of paper between there. So the oil is not being drawn from the pickup tube here where it's supposed to. Instead, you got this gap all the way up here around the whole face of this thing, and the pump's trying to suck it up through here. Well, unless this entire thing is submerged in oil, it's just going to cavitate inside there because it's just sucking air, you know, from up higher in this area. I mean, that pump goes clear up in there. So yeah, it's just gonna try and draw it in through here because this surface, these 2 surfaces aren't bolted tight together. So I'm glad that was our problem. Shouldn't be no problem to fix. We'll go ahead and we'll just pull all these bolts out, obviously except for those top 2, because that aluminum plate is in the way. You would have to actually take the oil pump off to do that, and like I said before, that is not an easy job to do. So we're just going to go ahead and make sure those top 2 get good and tight, obviously without stripping them out. I don't know what the torque specification is on this. I honestly don't care, because I'm going to put red Loctite on them, and I'm just going to make sure they're darn good and snug so they won't come out again. And yeah, we'll go from there. So I'm going to get all this kind of cleaned up a little bit. I'm going to get what bolts that are in there still out and get those wiped down and cleaned up. And then we'll come back as I put it all back together. Alright, so I'm actually I'm on a second day here. I actually quit last night after I got that last little bit of video, but it's kind of late and cold. So this morning I came out and I went ahead and I cleaned the pan up. I hosed it out real good with brake clean, and I tried to knock out this big dent in here. I got this area in here pretty flat. You couldn't probably see it before, but this was pushed up pretty good right here. You can kind of see where I was banging on it, but that won't hurt nothing. I just lightly rubbed on it with some, you know, 400 grit sandpaper to make sure there were no jagged pieces of metal hanging off it or anything, but it's okay. It's nice and smooth. So, and then the big dent that was here in this corner, you can see where that big crease was. That thing's pretty tough right there. I wailed on it a couple times with a hammer, and I barely budged it. So I do know though that it wasn't causing a problem because of where it's at. I know the sump sits back here, so, or the pickup tube, so we're okay. That's not going to hurt anything. I made sure the surface here was completely clean, and same with the metal gasket here that goes on it. That's kind of cool. I thought that must be an OEM thing, because aftermarket you'd never get a metal one. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put just some RTV on the pan itself, and then some on the other side of the gasket, and then I'll stick it back on there. But I wanted to show you that what I did exactly. So remember before, you'd look up in there and those bolts were all backed out, loose, yada yada. That was definitely our issue, or at least most of it. Anyways, I pulled all those bolts out, at least the ones that I could. I put red Loctite on all of them, and I put them back in, and I got them good and tight. Not too tight. You don't want to strip them out. They're really small, and they are threading into an aluminum housing, so you got to be careful. But I got them all back in there. They all tightened up good. None of them were stripped out, so that tells me they just backed out. And then, well, I put the plastic cover back on right there already, but the one big bolt that you saw in the video, the earlier part of it, was actually one of the main bolts that hold the oil pump to the block up here. So it was this one on this side, and it had fell out. Now the other side, the other bolt, it's not a bolt, it's a nut. There's a stud hanging out of there. I stuck the ratchet on that one, and I actually just spun it off with my finger. So it was literally a few more miles away from coming out. And once that one was out, this whole pump would have just been free to fall off, basically. So I went ahead and I did that, and while I was at it, I checked the nut on the gear for the oil pump that the chain rides on. Made sure that was good and tight, and it was tight. It hadn't came loose at all, so we're okay there. But yeah, then I just put my cover back on, and I got these 3 nuts that hold it on good and tight so they don't fall off either, and I think we're good to go. I tried to, looks like the sump might have took a little bit of a banging there from the bolts when they were in the pan. So I went ahead and I just kind of stuck a screwdriver in here, and I just kind of pulled it back open just a little bit to make sure oil could definitely get in there. I'm sure it was fine before, but anyways, yeah, that wraps it up for the most part, and I'm glad I was able to figure out what the problem was here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get my silicone on my pan and gasket, and I'm gonna glue the pan back on, and then I'll be right back. Hey, one thing, when you're putting your RTV on the pan, you can see it's just a small bead. I just ran it on the inside edge there, and I noticed that on the gasket there's this little rubber ring that runs all the way around. So that's more than likely the seal itself and not this metal spacer. So we'll just make sure that the RTV runs around the inside there, and that'll make sure that it contacts, the rubber on the gasket there. So just take and make sure you don't want to put too much on there, because it's just going to squeeze out and then head inside the pan where you don't want it. So just make sure you have just a smaller amount, just enough to kind of fill in any imperfections. You are reusing it. If you reuse it, if you buy a new one, you more than likely don't have to put anything on there. I normally like to put just a thin layer on with my finger just in case, but yeah, do that. Make sure you don't get too much. You don't want to squeeze a bunch into the pan when you tighten it up. So alright, so I've got the oil pan back on, got my drain plug in, made sure it was tight. I let the silicone on the RTV on the oil pan set up for about the last 15 or 20 minutes. While I was doing that, I went ahead and I changed out the oil filter. I did notice when I pulled that filter out that there was still a lot of the previous oil in there, and that's pretty obvious. That's going to happen because it stays in the canister. So I might actually run the car for just a little while and then dump the oil and change it again. I know that sounds kind of expensive, but I don't want any of that crud sludge or whatever, that black oil from the motor flush running around in the motor. So I'll probably go ahead and just maybe we'll put 100 miles or something on it, and then we'll dump it and change it again. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and fill it up with oil now, and we'll start it up and see if that cured our problem. Alright, so I've got good news to report. I went ahead and I filled the engine up with oil. I set the car down, and I started it up, and for just a few seconds the oil light was on. That usually happens every time you change your oil and filter anyway, because it takes a minute to get oil up into the canister and stuff for the pump to do it. So the oil light was only on for maybe a second or two, and as soon as it built pressure, the engine got nice and quiet and sounded great. And I'm going to start it up and show you. I don't know why this camera doesn't want to focus very good, but yeah, no oil light. I got a tail light out is why it's saying that, and the washer fluid's low, no big deal. But no more stop engine, no more oil light. That would normally be right over here in this corner. The car's actually been running before I started the video here. I actually had it running for almost 20 minutes or so. So far so good. The engine actually sounds better than it has last 2 times I worked on this car, so the pressure thing must have been an issue for a while. Motor sounds nice and tight. I am very thrilled. Anyways, guys, I hope that helps you out. Like I said, the job itself was very simple to do. Just a little bit of time, and in fact, if I would have just did it start to finish, I could have had it done in probably just an hour or two. So yeah, everything looks good, and hope that helps somebody out. You guys got any questions or anything, just give me a holler. All right.